Oh,
Just going to click. So, and I will give people just a few minutes, but hello and warm welcome to everyone who is joining today's session. This is a inclusive insights webinar. This might be your first session, or you might have been on some of the previous sessions hosted by Accessible Me back in January and February this year. My name is Michael Osborne, and pronouns are he, him. I am the founder and CEO of Accessible Me, and I am chairing today's sessions, which is Insights from People with Disabilities. As I say, this is part of our ongoing series, and we are absolutely thrilled to have you joining us. And what we'll be discussing today is practical accessibility solutions across learning, work, and life. We do encourage you to use the chat box function. So if you'd like to introduce yourselves in the chat, then please do so. And when we're not speaking, we will keep an eye on the chat in itself. Now, I will introduce the speakers in a moment, but in order to do that, I will hand over to allow them to speak. So if we just move on to the next slide. So we often say nothing about us without us, and for Accessible Me, that absolutely needs to be more than just a slogan. I have spoken at a number of conferences over the years, and I've been trying to push a number of these conferences, in fact, to allow me to chair a session with people with disabilities rather than me speaking about my experiences or on behalf of others. And to date, that hasn't happened. So I thought, well, let's be the change we aspire to see. So today we will hear from three remarkable speakers who will be bringing depth, clarity, and lived insight into the conversation all around inclusion. These are all people who work in this every day, so in organizations, in policies, in training rooms, in public speaking engagements, and always through the lens of lived experiences. So, with that, if you allow me to briefly introduce the speakers for today's sessions, PK, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself first and foremost?
Yeah, sure. I'll do the very quick unmute. But yeah, my name is PK Kulasegram. My pronouns are they, them. I'll just do a brief visual description. I'm a mixed race person with sort of fair skin, a black mustache, and short black hair. I'm currently wearing a black headset with a red wire and a black shirt with very hard to see on the camera blue roses on it. And yeah, I'm a director, consultant, speaker, diversity trainer for a social enterprise called Simply Equality, where we actually deal with the sort of intersections of disability and LGBT plus sort of oppression. Um, I also am autistic, have ADHD, other mental health conditions, and hypermobility spectrum disorder, which means that my joints do not like to live where joints are supposed to live, and my ribs do go wandering when they feel like it. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Fantastic. Rox, so if I stick to the today's running order, if we can come to you next, would you like to take a moment to introduce yourself?
absolutely. Thank you, Michael. My name is Rox or Roxanne Steel. My pronouns are they, she, but don't worry if you get those wrong. I answer to most things. Just a quick visual description of me today. I'm a white presenting person. I have dyed black hair that's quite short with the side shave. I think it's still slightly pink at the moment. And I have bright purple makeup representing the purple pound. In regards to who I am and what I do, this is quite new for me because I've just transitioned from being an accessibility and inclusion lead at Diversity and Ability, which has unfortunately closed. So now I'm going under the title, and I hope to have got it right and remember it, multi-diversity and intersectional inclusion leader, which means a lot of things in a lot of spaces, but I get to wear a lot of hats, including training, consultancy, and public speaking. But today I get to wear my favorite invisible hat, so it's not visual, of really facilitating conversations that I think break down barriers. And what I find is important is collaboration. It's not about me sat here telling you about myself, it's to enable people to feel part of that journey. So thank you for having me.
And then last but certainly not least, Simon, if we can come to you next.
Sure. Hi. Thank you very much, Michael, for putting this together and having the speakers and for everyone who's joined. My name is Simon Houghton. Visual description, I wear glasses. I also have hearing aids, which you probably can't see, and that's a clue to what I'll be talking about in a bit. Aging, so in my early 50s, not much hair, brown hair that's left, and I'm a white male, and I have a white door, cream door behind me, and hopefully that's going to stop the dogs from coming in, disturbing us while we're talking today. I was born deaf. I was a premature baby. I have a severe hearing loss, not profound. So there's different grades of hearing loss. I have a severe hearing loss, and I rely heavily on lip reading and my hearing aids. I started a campaign in pandemic times called We Support Deaf Awareness, which I can talk a little bit later about that. But ultimately, what I've been doing more recently is something called Unseen Aware, which helps staff to feel more confident and empathetic towards colleagues, visitors, customers, and patients who have a hidden disability. Outside of that, I'm a performance psychologist and I've got a background in behavior and culture change, and my specialism is psychological safety. So really, really excited to be here today and looking forward to the discussions that will come. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. And those of you who have signed up today through Eventbrite or have followed our social media may have noticed we are missing one of our speakers today. We should have been joined by Remy College recently. Unfortunately, Remy is unable to join us today, but if you do follow us on our channels, rest assured we will be catching up with Remy another time. And if you and we will post that chat, both the transcript on our LinkedIn pages as a blog, and also the video will go out on our YouTube as well. So if you signed up today to hear from Remy, fear not, you will have the opportunity to hear from Remy at another stage. So with that, I figured let's dive into the conversation. And I'm just going to bring up the slides once more so we can just for the intro pieces. And so hopefully you should see my slide again now. So starting with you, PK, and these are the questions we will be going through for the next 10 minutes or so. So number one is, what does co-designing look like in practice? How can organizations get that right? And what missteps have you seen? Now, I'm not going to keep that on screen for the entire duration of the session because I always think it's better in these challenges to see the person who's speaking in themselves. So PK, I suppose kicking off with question one, I suppose, as someone who has led systemic inclusion work across different sectors, what does the term co-design with lived experience actually look like in practice, and how can organizations get that right?
I think that's a really good question, to be honest. And when we think about co-design,
Max, shut up.
You Google sort of all sorts of hilarious things. The joy of Zoom, I guess, are not being on mute, but also if I meow, it's because the cat likes to talk every now and then, and he will appear if he doesn't. But to answer the question in terms of co-design with lived experience, I think it is specifically about seeking the expertise that comes with actually having that lived experience and that sort of breadth and variety of it. So when we think about designing, let's say, like an initiative that is aimed at neuro inclusion, it's not just engaging with autistic people or people with ADHD, dyslexic people, dyspraxic people, but a whole spectrum of neurotypes, and actually even within neurotypes varieties, because things like your racial background, the presence of other disabilities, your cultural background, socioeconomic background to an extent, gender, all of that stuff has an impact in what you'll need and what kind of barriers you'll face in society. So when we're actually making those co-designed experiences, that's where that lived experience really thrives. Because if you are an expert, let's say, in marketing and you know all about it, that's your sort of bread and butter. But for all intents and purposes, you haven't had to engage with a lot of disability stuff. You might see something as very aesthetic and be like, ooh, I like the vibe of that. This is aesthetically pleasing. So you do a lot of stuff around that. But because you don't have any other voice in the room going, hey, actually, people with red, green color blindness cannot see your beautiful design, you then publish it. And actually, that's quite a large section of the population who can't see the beautiful thing that you've spent hours working on, who can't see your logo. When we were redesigning our logo, for example, we worked with a disabled designer, Jessica Oddy, absolutely wonderful human, love her to bits. And it was an interesting conversation because color is actually quite a big part of our label because we wanted to symbolize, the LGBT plus side. And that's the kind of biggest visual cue, right? Is those different pride flag colors, but we also didn't want it to be accessible if you couldn't see pride flag colors or see it all. My business partner is totally blind. So when we were just creating a label, it was really fun because I had to be able to describe what I was seeing to her succinctly to kind of make it work. And that actually forced us to have to really be considerate with how we were creating this logo because we wanted it to reflect us. And it's kind of a bad look for you to have an inaccessible logo as a sort of accessibility enterprise. And I think this is kind of the thing of lived experience is it just adds that depth and nuance. So often without that lived experience, you do something because it seems like a good idea without necessarily thinking it through. And a really good example of this is signage and braille signs on doors. And I was once talking to my business partner, Sarah, and I was telling her about a little thing I'd seen where someone had printed out a braille sign, as in just normal on paper. So it was just an image of braille dots, which obviously is like functionally useless. And I was halfway through the story and really like kind of laughing about it. And Sarah was like, you know what? Braille signs are just useless anyway, because I have no idea that it's on the wall. So how am I supposed to know the sign is even there? Right? And you think about how many braille signs you see outside of a meeting room, outside of a doorway, and companies have spent money on this, and they're functionally useless, right? Because, as Sarah said, how does she know it's there? No blind person, at least that I've ever sort of interacted with, walks around feeling along the walls as they're getting places. That's just not how it works, which kind of made me think about, okay, what are alternatives? Because that actually it would be really cool if she could figure out that there was, a door or whatever. And in Japan, they created sort of railings, and the underneath of railings, that was where the braille was, because people will use railings because it's really useful for mobility. But also that meant that actually then they would have a cue that something was there. And I think that's the thing of when you start to engage with the people you're supposed to be kind of keeping in mind and creating these interventions for, you can create stuff that works. And the nice thing is often when you create stuff that works for one demographic, it works for others. So in the case of the banisters, if you're someone like me whose joints frequently go, you know what, not today actually, I would like to be elsewhere. We won't be holding you together. That's quite boring. Having banisters is really useful because I also have ADHD and sometimes I forget walking stick places and then I can just sort of use a banister to get around. Or even if you're, going through menopause and you're suddenly dealing with vertigo and you need something to like be a bit more stable. And that's why it's so beautiful. And so if we think about how organizations can actually get this right, it is specifically about engaging in good faith, but also being quite honest about your limitations. So there's no point kind of saying, we want to make the most wonderful thing possible and, have it be universally accessible, which can't really exist anyway. Take all of these people who have lived experience, take their time, their energy, and then not actually be able to do anything because you have a listed building, because you don't have the budget, because actually it sounded like a good idea at the time, but it's more hard work now that you've kind of seen it in practice, or there are actual legal restrictions, So there's a piece to maintain, I think, sort of that transparency around it. Sorry, I realized that was a very long, waffly answer.
No, no, it's fantastic, and I think you've raised some really important points already with intersectionality. You know, like a lot of people with disabilities have more than one condition, and your point around I think there's something like 521 different registered disabilities that an individual could have, and an individual could have one or more. So it is very difficult to try and design for everyone, and also I think designing for one person and making certain accommodations, you don't want to do a one size fits all because it could put someone else at a disadvantage. So if we take open plan offices, generally
No
speaking,
one
very
likes
much
them.
generally, although generally frowned upon through the neurodiverse community, but I've seen some research where actually if you are deaf or hard of hearing, open plan offices can be beneficial because you improve the line of sight. So do you know, so I do think generally speaking, there is quite a stigma on open plan offices. You know, it's important not to generalize too much. But as a follow-up question, what are some of the missteps you've seen when EDI is tokenistic?
Uh, so I think the fact that they're tokenistic in and of themselves is a misstep. So it's the kind of thing
Yes.
of we've got the one deaf person to consult and that's it. We've got the one autistic person to consult and that's it. And there's that intersectional component, right? Which is kind of often when you're doing quite a tokenistic gesture, what you're saying is please just only deal with the disability box. Don't bring anything else to bear on this conversation. Don't bring anything of yourself to this conversation. Just focus on disability. And that's just not how it works, especially when we're talking about disability, because your race can have and your gender can have huge impacts on your access to things like a diagnosis, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so if we're creating an intervention that just says, oh, we're just going to deal with how autism affects you, but not thinking about how your gender might affect how your autism even presents, or how your race affects whether or not you could even admit you were autistic, etc., then we're going to like miss people. And I've seen lots of places, lots of instances where companies have kind of gone, oh, but you know, we have the one autistic person and he really, really likes this. And it's like, that's great for
Yes.
him, but it's not the same. And you know, your point about the open plan office is an interesting one because there's research that's not just like neurodiverse people, but lots of people struggle with them. But
Yes.
it's having the options and figuring out what actually works and being creative and flexibility. And I think the biggest misstep I see in terms of stuff being tokenistic and a big indicator can often be organizations that have the budget not paying people with lived experience for their time and
Yes.
expecting that labor for free and having no kind of recognition. And often I think that's the biggest red flag. And as well, it sort of creates a psychological barrier as at an organizational level. When organizations have to put their money where their mouth is, they generate that buy-in because they have to commit to it now, whether they were doing it for the wrong reasons or whatever. So I think the biggest kind of misstep is when they kind of try and cut a corner and go, oh, we're just going to do this, but we're going to try and do it with as little resource as possible and hope that works. So we'll only
Yeah.
talk to one autistic person and hope that they like it.
No, that's fantastic insights. We will have an opportunity to hear from PK again shortly, but Rox, if we may come to you next, just going to bring up that slide once more, so so we can follow the instructions and just give people an idea of what to expect. So hopefully I should be screen sharing now. So in terms of questions, we have on the screen. So what sorry, not what do gets in the way. What gets in the way of embedding accessibility, whether that's from a compliance perspective or a culture perspective? And when that does happen, how do you navigate this when work inclusion momentum kind of quiets down? Now, I'm going to start screen sharing once more and kind of go back to the questions. So, yeah, when you're delivering inclusion training from across different sectors, what do you think gets in the way of actually embedding accessibility? Do you know, not just within compliance, but as a culture, how do you make that, you know, part of the company's fabric and DNA?
That's an interesting question, and I think a really, really important question. Obviously, my work and the way I live, because I think if you work in this space, you can't really separate it, is around recognizing that everyone is in different spaces. So I bring not only my lived experience to support this, but actually years of sector experience that I'm constantly developing. I've worked with many types of clients over many types of sectors. So that might be private, corporate clients, charity clients, educational clients, and individuals. And of course, we all have different means and resources. So a lot of the challenges may be around financial or where your culture is at the moment. But if I was to take it down to one commonality or something that I would say every person that I work with is something that we need to focus on is mindset. And that can go across anyone that we work with, because it doesn't matter where you are, where your culture is, and where you want to be. But if we don't examine that, we're not able to remove barriers. So if I just talk about barriers for a moment, if that's okay.
Please
Obviously,
do.
there are many barriers that we could discuss, but I'll just distill it into a couple for you. So physical barriers, so that might be the stairs, not having access to lifts, for example, or the physical barrier of the space, like the open plan offices. Then you've got things like communication barriers. So not only how we're communicating, but where we're communicating. And if we don't create communication without barriers, then we're barring information as well. The information doesn't get to the right people. But one of the most important barriers that we talk about in the space is attitudinal barriers. So that could be my attitude as an individual that is disabled with disabling experiences, or it could be yours as a client. For example, you know, what you assume or what you think you know about me. A lot of attitudinal barriers will come around inclusion, accessibility, people like me being expensive. So that's why I say the one common thing we must talk about is mindset. And the wonderful thing about that is everyone has a mindset, regardless of what role, where you are in your journey, and it's not expensive. And if we think about all the barriers that I've just discussed as dominoes, so think about the old game, not pizza. Hopefully I'm not making anyone hungry at lunchtime. And we put that attitudinal barrier at the start and knock it down to create momentum. You're going to start seeing the physical barriers. You're going to start seeing communication barriers, which will remove information barriers. So for me, the biggest challenge is around that attitude and mindset and going beyond compliance. For example, things like the Equality Act or WCAG guidelines. A lot of clients or individuals say we meet that minimum need, but actually that guidance is just a framework to make sure that you're meeting the minimum. So what we want to do is actually say to people, we should go beyond the minimum. We should actually look at these guidelines as supportive, as opportunities to be creative and support removing barriers. Can we be innovative? For example, if you're a tech company, you know, can you create something that not only shines what your brand is, but actually breaks barriers beyond WCAG? For example, this is a challenge to be industry leaders. I mentioned the purple pound because of my eye makeup at the start, and this talks about the value and the money client base. That actually, if we're not creating spaces and cultures where people can thrive, you are missing out on your clients. So what you've got to think about is actually if the minimum requirement for example, a screen reader experience on your website was every client's experience, would you be happy? If this was what you were giving out every day and that was your highest standard, and if the answer is no, then you've got work to do. And it doesn't have to be expensive. It has to be creative. And bringing it back to the intersectional piece that I'm so glad PK brought up, actually, we have to think beyond disablement, beyond those barriers, and thinking if we create things with design that looks at culture and beyond compliance, you're creating an environment where every single one of your individuals, or even yourself, can truly thrive, regardless of whether you have a disabled label or not. And that's why I bring it back to collaboration is so important.
And Rox, you mentioned the WCAG guidelines, and I think I have pointed out to clients that a number of times that when they say, "Oh, we're inclusive because we meet the WCAG guidelines," and actually, like, you can meet all of their criteria and still have gendered language or other areas, you know, which make your content non-exclusive. So and if you think about these different initiatives like a Black History Month or Black Pound Month, Purple Pound Month, or Pride Month, these different things that happen, you know, quite often there's a lot of buzz around the topic, and neurodiversity is certainly a hot topic at the moment. But how do you navigate the work you're doing when kind of the momentum ties down kind of the rest of the year? Because I try and tell a lot of companies, you know, this isn't just a day of the week, it's not a week of the year, a month of the year. Like, we're here all of the time. So how do you approach this?
Okay, for example, just to set the scene, isn't Father's Day coming up? I'm pretty sure it is.
I believe so.
And it's all about you know, representing not only maybe if you've got a dad or the people that you love or role models. It doesn't mean that you don't love them on any other single day or whenever you're celebrating them, they're not considered. So actually, these are just reminders and checkpoints to allow us to have that celebration. What we have to think about is how we create processes, events, opportunities all year round. And when you're thinking about, for example, you've mentioned other celebration days, think intersectionally. For example, you know, I am a white presenting person that has a physical disablement. I also identify as being neurodiverse, or what I like to call neurodiverse pattern pending, because I don't have a diagnosis yet. But actually, I recognise myself as pansexual, gender fluid. So I recognise myself within that space as well. So when we're celebrating, when we're discussing, we have to think intersectionally. We shouldn't presume or identify who's within that space. For example, I'm, you know, conscious that I am a white disabled person, but actually the barriers I discuss and the barriers I face will be different of that of a black disabled person. So again, when we're celebrating, for example, Black History Month, we must think about those experiences as well. But ultimately, I just want to go on to how do we keep the momentum going? Because it definitely feels a bit quieter at the moment, or people feel less confident because of the narratives going on in the world. And I think people feel less confident. But I think what we need to do is, again, remember that this isn't just a buzzword or an initiative. For example, it kind of has had to be in the past because we didn't have that representation. But I like to think about these laws as bridging laws to the point of we can all be human beings. So actually what we want to do is create environments that have D&I, not as an extra, but a missing step. So how to keep going on, keep supporting in those spaces is feel comfortable with being uncomfortable. Take time to reflect and think how you want to participate. Everyone has a space to participate. It's just about the right way of doing it. And it's not about shouting louder. And it's not about being quieter. It's about being consistent, collaborative, and confident.
That's fantastic. Just conscious of time. So Simon, if
Michael,
Yes,
So, Michael, could I
absolutely.
just add something? Could I add something to that? Is that all right from
Please
what
do.
Rox has
Please do.
said? They have all these awareness days and awareness weeks. There's Disability Pride Month as an example. And often they pat themselves on the back at the end of the month and go, yeah, yeah, get the bunting down, finish off the cake. And then it all gets put into one drawer to be repurposed a year later. So what they need to do, they need to look at this differently. One is when there is a Pride Month or a disability, a Black History Month, whatever it might be,
Yes.
there needs to be some concrete things that A, people need to sign up to. B, there needs to be good things that organisation can download. So if it is Black History Month, they often have these slogans. Everyone talks about the slogan, but there's no practical material that can be shared within the organisation. Say, we're signing up to Black History Month, and these are the things that we're going to adopt, and these are the things that we're going to do during that month. What you also need to do is, how are we going to show that we've changed between July the 31st or whenever it was at the end of Pride History Month and the 1st of July the following year? What can people say that they're going to commit to doing? There isn't that sort of mechanism in place. And just an example on that one, what I do is I use a flag every single Monday, and I promote a disability advocate for others to follow. So that way people can be reminded of the flag every single Monday.
Yes.
So hopefully people will start to think, oh yeah, and it's coming up in 3 months' time. So it's really important, as Rox has said, you've got to keep the momentum going. But I think the awareness months or weeks or days themselves need to do more than just coming up with a marketing slogan, but actually give some real stuff that people can download, take, discuss, and permeate within the organisation that says that they are deaf aware or whatever it might be for that week.
And it's so much more than just changing the color of your logo for a week and making it
Exactly. Yes,
stripy,
exactly.
or
And they do nothing else
taking the
except
color out.
changing the light. Yes, exactly.
So Simon, coming to you next, the questions I'd like to ask you are: why are unseen disabilities still so misunderstood, and what does good allyship look like when conditions aren't visible? So I will repeat those one by one in just a moment. So yeah, starting with the first one, you built Unseen and Aware from your lived experiences. Why do you think disabilities are so unseen disabilities in particular are still even in this day and age so misunderstood? And in your experience, what does allyship look like when conditions aren't visible?
Okay, so the first one about why they're so misunderstood. If I was to say to the majority of people in an audience of range of abilities and say, when I say disability, what do you think of? The majority of people, not everyone, particularly the ones that are already on the right side, but others who are less sort of have not thought about it. The majority of people will think wheelchair. Okay, so there's wheelchair is
the logo at the end of the day, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So all the white stick, the service dogs, and so that's one of the reasons it's not visible. So people can't see it. You can't see that I'm deaf. You can't see that certain people have got a particular disability. Because I use myself as an example, I have a severe hearing loss. I wear hearing aids, but because my speech isn't bad, people immediately forget. So I have a conversation with someone, and then a couple of days later, or a couple of hours later, or a couple of minutes later, they'll say something, and I don't reply in how they were expecting, and they're like, "Oh, you idiot." It's because they've forgotten that my deafness is there. It's because you can't see it, and because in my particular case, they're not given a cue every time I speak. In some cases, if you have a profound hearing loss and you're born profoundly deaf, then sometimes your speech might give a bit of an indicator that even if you don't know that person's deaf, that there might be something that they need to look out for. So it's easily forgotten. Lack of education. I think people don't really understand that disability means something that's going on in your head or in one of your senses, as opposed to, a physical disability. And the other thing, and I think that this is something that I'm trying to draw out with Unseen Aware, is a lot of people, and I'm I'm guilty of it myself. A lot of people who do have a hidden disability, they do what we call, I'm sure many people come across the term, we mask. So we mask our disability because we want to fit in. We don't want to keep telling people that, I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? Can you repeat that? That 1 hour meeting ends up being 6 hours. So I would say, oh, yeah, that's fine. And then pray that I can speak to somebody after the meeting to find out the important things that was said that maybe has an action on myself. So those are some of the reasons why I think this unseen or hidden disabilities are so misunderstood. And I think we need to, people who have got that hidden disability need to feel comfortable. And this is where the psychological safety comes into it. If the organisation or the environment that we're in is psychologically safe, then we need those people to talk more about their disability and make it unseen, or make it seen, if you like, because people are willing to talk about it.
So on to the second part of the question then, I suppose. What does good allyship look like when the conditions aren't available? So how can people be a better allies?
Well, it's interesting what Rox said. It's about, attitude. So I think that there's the attitude. I talk within Unseen Aware when we do the training, when people go through that training, we talk about 3 things in particular to make it simple to people to remember. It's patience, empathy, and kindness. And so if you can be patient, if you can be empathetic, if you can be kinder, I think that goes a long way to being an ally. There are some specific principles that we teach on the Unseen Aware program, things like don't make assumptions. So don't assume that just because you hear someone's deaf, it means that they need a BSL interpreter, for example. Or just because someone's got chronic fatigue syndrome, they need to sit down. Ask them. Respectful communication. So, in terms of labels are quite a difficult topic because what works for one person might not work for somebody else. And that leads to things like willingness to learn. That's another principle. So, you are going to make mistakes. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But be mature and open and honest about that and say, I'm really sorry if that offended you. I want to learn. What can I do to help? What can I do to be different?
I think
and then there's always
point.
speaking. I mean, just sorry?
Yeah, absolutely. Go on.
Just 2 final ones. Always speaking up. So as an ally, if you see something where somebody is being ridiculed, if someone's being treated in a way that's not, they're not being treated as a fair human, then allies should be stepping up and challenging things like bias and stereotypes as well. So just because somebody says, they have a learning difficulty, it means that they couldn't possibly operate a computer, or they couldn't possibly go and do that job. People are more capable than we think. So that's what I would say is some of the things that people need to think about. But again, it's patience, kindness, and empathy.
And I think some of those assumptions you say people make definitely are there. So I've likened it to Tourette's sometimes, the being like that scene in Finding Nemo where people find out that Marlin is a clownfish, therefore they wait for him to say something funny. Having Tourette's, in my experience, is very much like that. If I say I have Tourette's, people wait for me to say something funny or wait for me to swear because that's what they've seen on the TV in the 90s. And I do think things are getting better there with documentaries and awareness of influencers like Lewis Capaldi, being open about his condition. So I think things are heading in the right direction. The more we speak about it. And the other thing I wanted to pick up on is what you're saying in regards to that psychological safety is just if you are on this journey and you want to be an ally, not being frozen into inaction. Now, I've worked with a number of CEOs in different companies who would often say to me, Mike, I would love to do more, but I don't because I am afraid if I say something and I misgender someone or I get their prognosis wrong with the disability, that they're going to be offended, and now it just becomes not just a slip of the tongue, but newsworthy that a CEO in this multinational company has said this, so they end up doing nothing. And so Simon, you've worked with, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but over 400,000 employees. What message resonates with you most in terms of like
Sure.
the people you've met
So
and
the
working with data?
400,000 comes from there's 425,000 people who have access to the deaf awareness training that I put together. It's
Amazing.
online. So a range of organisations, big and small. You kind of touched on it. The key thing that that people are worried about is embarrassing themselves, embarrassing the individual they're trying to talk to, not saying the right thing. And so lack of education because they feel they can't be empathetic because they don't know what it's like to live with a particular
Yes.
disability. And so and then lack of confidence. And confidence being that, if somebody comes up to you and says, just to let you know, I've got Tourette's or I'm deaf or whatever, people freeze and they go, like you said, inaction.
Yeah.
And just to pick up a little bit on that particular thing about confidence. So unseen aware, it starts off, there's more to it, but there is an online e-learning element. And what we do is we measure their level of confidence at the start of the training and at the end of the allyship e-learning. On average, the pre-score, which is where they basically see quite an uncomfortable scenario where somebody's not doing the right thing, and somebody comes in, just to let you know I'm deaf, do you sign? And they're looking like, oh my goodness, what do I do? On average, the score is about 3 out of 10.
Yeah.
But then within the hour, once they've done that initial training, the average score tends to go up by 3.5. So it goes up to about 6.5 to 7 out of 10. And that's only within the 1 hour. So it's not difficult to improve confidence and improve empathy. But I think that's the biggest thing. People are scared. And when they don't know what to do, then what they tend to do is just ignore entirely. So if somebody's come into a shop, I've got Tourette's, they'll just like, which shoe size do you need? They'll just completely ignore what was said. And they said it for a reason. They told you they've got Tourette's for a reason. So you need to engage with them, but they don't know how to. And that's what I'm trying to do with Unseen Aware.
No, that's fantastic. And with that in mind, I am going to screen share once more. This and not for long. Has it actually come up? Screen share. So with that, we are moving promptly on to our audience Q&A. So before we get on to that, I want to sincerely thank all of our panelists for sharing your rich insights. And now I would like to turn to audience from our questions. So whether you want to share your questions in chat, and if I can rely on my co-speakers to have a look at the chat, if there's any questions that particularly stood out to you. The other thing I would like to invite is we've heard from 3 fantastic speakers today, but if you want to be heard yourself, either by sharing your own experiences or to come off mute and ask your question, please use that raise the hand feature, assuming you know how to do that in Zoom, and we'll take some 2 or 3 questions from the audience depending on time and timings, and we'll go from there. So just to remind you, we have PK, we have Roxanne, and we have Simon. And one thing I would say as well is if you do come off mute, just take a moment to say who you are, what your name is, and then ask your question. So again, I'm going to stop screen sharing at this stage, and yeah, over to my panelists and over to those we have on today's call. Are there specific questions we have that are screaming out to you in chat? Because if not, I've got some more questions which I can throw out to individuals. I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat myself.
Sorry, I had a technical problem. I couldn't get off mute there.
All good, all good.
There looks like there's a question from Pauline that I think I'd like to answer, but is it possible if you could read it out so it's clearer?
Pauline, if I could possibly invite you to do that just whilst I find it in chat, but if you don't feel comfortable, then we will seek to do that.
I think
Is
I
it the
found
one
it,
at
so
12, 10
it.
minutes past 12?
12:22, yes.
Oh,
Okay, I think I
12:22.
found it. I can read it.
Apologies.
No worries. So, and I'm happy to also chime in as well, Roxanne. So I asked in my company how our hiring process looks like, and we do not have any accessibility adjustments. Sort of a frowny face emoticon. So my question is, based on your knowledge, what could I suggest? In one company I applied to, I got extra time on a task, but there was still some logic tests that I struggle with as I have ADHD. How can we address all needs, especially during live interviews? Rox, do you want to take it and then I can chime in after you've had your say?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sure all of us will say there's so much that we could probably discuss on this particular subject. But if I'm just looking at this question as I understand it, in regards to what could the company do better or what you could ask for yourself, what I would look at is having a review of your recruitment processes. Look at your policies and how they invite people. Look at the opportunities. I think a lot of people think accessibility adjustments, again, are physical and expensive, but actually it's about asking everyone, how could you best succeed in this space? So even thinking about, can we do interviews differently? Does it need to be in this process? Does it need to be in this space? Do I actually need a CV to apply, or could I apply through a video or an audio? Think about providing questions in advance as standard for everyone, because why should it be a test of what people can remember? And what you'll find is that places that have no questions, the people that will succeed are the ones that have probably gone through many an interview and gotten into a space and moved on because they've just learned this script. They've learned the things to say rather than actually getting to know the people. Obviously, that's just a few tips, but I would really advise any big companies where they're able to look at doing an audit of your recruitment process right from the beginning to onboarding to how you communicate everything, and ask organizations or individuals such as myself to either help conduct that audit or even give you recommendations based on your own audit.
Yeah,
I think I can't give you an answer until you look at the processes, because there might already be things that you already have. Sorry, PK.
No, that's okay. I've ADHD, very good at cutting across people. But yeah, thanks. And if I'm gonna sort of jump in as well. I think I agree with all the stuff that Rox has said. Look at your processes, see what you're already doing. If you've identified areas for improvement, get in people who have that expertise to support you. But the other bit that is really important is to think about how you can encourage people to tell you what they need. Simon talked about that psychological safety. When I'm working with organizations, often what I will tell them is, tell us what you're already doing, which, right, it comes back to that audit thing. If you cannot tell us what you're already doing and providing, if you don't know what it is, think about, does this need to be an interview? I personally really have an issue with interviewers because all an interview does is tell us how good someone is at interviews. It has no indication that they will do a good job, right? And yet we do it. It's standard process across most industries. You submit a CV, then you have to fill out 8 million forms, all of which don't work properly. Sometimes this doesn't happen, but standard process, this is what does. Then maybe you get an interview, maybe you have to do a second interview, and all you're doing is performing, but you've no idea how that person's going to do in their job unless their job is being interviewed, in which case, absolutely interview them till the cows come home. Then you know how they interview. And again, to that thing of interview questions in advance to everyone, that helps so many people across the board, right? And it's a free thing to do. It also helps your interviewers because they can tell who's bothered to prep, and that gives them additional things to know about. And I think this is the kind of thing is when we're looking and talking about adjustments, about making recruitment more accessible, thinking about that intersectional thing, asking, hey, what could we do better, and taking action on it, but also saying this is what we're already doing, so people can tell that you're not just saying, hey, we'd like to do better. Everyone's seen, that paragraph going, we encourage people from underrepresented backgrounds to apply, blah, 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 blah. Cool. That's great. What are you doing to actually encourage me to apply outside of that statement? Is your website accessible? Have you consciously gone out to showcase that, hey, like, if you apply and get the job, you won't be the only trans person, you won't be the only LGBT person, you won't be the only disabled person. All of these things are what candidates are looking for when they're like vetting your company. And it's really, really important to think about the image we're conveying. So that's sort of my additional thing. And yeah, saying these are what we can provide. Let us know what else you need. Helps get that conversation started, and it then becomes a conversation rather than, I hope that you'll tell me what you need.
Fantastic. And Simon, I don't know if you have anything to add on that specific question, but I've seen a question from Jeremy in the chat in regards to what ICT you use most when using websites outside of screen readers. So is there a particular
Yeah, if I can, I was
software you
just typing something up, but yeah,
Sorry.
so no, so screen readers obviously for people who have vision impairments is really useful. And I'm not an accessibility consultant. As I think yourself, Michael, would be better. But what I can tell you that for people who have BSL needs, so there are now a number of companies that are creating AI enabled BSL kind of add-ons. So if you have a video, then the BSL engine or the AI engine will actually show the BSL alongside it. So that means it's better for people so they can create content, put it online, and then the BSL is there for them when people need it, rather than having to take longer to get that content online because you have to go through an interpreter, for example. It's still early days, but a lot of people are starting to. I can't think of the name of some of the companies that I'm aware of, but I have come across them. So that's the main thing for me. For being deaf is sound. So if I watch videos, I make sure that they've always got subtitles. If they don't have subtitles or closed captions, as it's known, it instantly turns me off. I won't try and watch the rest of the video. So you alienate a lot of people. But like PK said, we talked about having handles. What was it? I can't remember what you said.
The braille under the
banisters,
yeah. That's right. So that is to help everybody. And we all know watching something on a train where it's noisy, you can turn the volume off, but you can actually just watch the video and you can see the subtitles or the closed captions. It helps everyone. That if it's not there, will drive traffic away from either your brand or the video. And there's something that I've found on some videos recently is that they'll say some subtitles and then it says, put your speakers on, a little symbol, and then subtitles stop. So you have in a video that's maybe 5 minutes long, there was a Jonathan Ross interview, the first minute had subtitles and then had this symbol saying on, and then it stopped. And for the remainder of the video, there was no subtitles. I ain't going to be watching any more of those because that's it's not fair and it's not being very inclusive.
Certainly, and just to add to that, I use in day-to-day a number of tools. It might be the accessibility checker in Microsoft, for example. It might be in Firefox. When you do the inspection, you can check for things like accessibility. Those things are very useful. And also, I use a lot of read aloud tools now. I don't necessarily have dyslexia, but I can struggle, especially if it's text that I've written myself. I can kind of fail to pick up on mistakes. So just having text read aloud to me is massively important in terms of QAing, and that's a point I'd just kind of like to acknowledge in a lot of these things that are designed for people with disabilities, such as the electric toothbrush or dropped curbs, they actually have far-reaching applications beyond accessibility. I think we may have time for one more question, and I'm gonna, again, throw back to my panelists if there's a particular one in the chat you'd like to deal with, and I will save the transcript, and so again, keep an eye on our socials, follow if you're not, and we will do a couple of blogs to address some of these questions. So, is there a particular question in the chat that's reaching out to any of you?
There's one that Jen has put, 1249. What's one thing trainers could do in virtual classes like Zoom to make them
Yes.
more accessible? I don't know whether that's something that people want to chip into. It might be quite useful for everybody because we all use Zoom these days.
Yes.
We
We're using it right now, in fact.
Absolutely. Obviously, I'm very conscious of the time. I think this is a
Yep.
question that could go very far reaching because accessibility means a lot of things. But what I would say as kind of tips is think about consistency. So think about consistency in the way that you're inviting people, the way that the information that you're providing information in advance, ensuring, for example, that the actual session slides are designed accessibly and provided, making sure that delivery in itself is accessible. That could even be the way you pace questions, the way your background set up, and think about how people actually contribute to the session. Are there other options? Are there ways
Live polls and such, yeah.
contribute? Because it's much more than just built-in features. They are a supportive measure, but actually what you want to be is accessible from design, from the beginning. So you have to look at the whole process.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point. PK?
I think to like add to that, like as Rock said, like this could really go long because it means so many different things to different people. Being really mindful of the language that you're using and also being willing to own your mistakes and to get that feedback
Yes.
and to improve for next time. I think we talked a lot, like Simon talked a lot about the kind of people getting paralyzed with indecision and worrying about getting it wrong. And the thing that I frequently tell people is, and I will try and do this as succinctly as possible, is you will get things wrong. We all live and breathe
Yes.
this stuff, and I will get things wrong all the time. Everyone has like that one person at family barbecue you know is going to say something absolutely abhorrent, right? You never want it, but like no one ever bothers correcting them because they know they're never going to
Yes.
change. You never want to be that person. You always want to be the person that people can come up to and say, hey, what you did actually really wasn't great. They may not do it with kindness, they may not even do it calmly, but it is still better to be that person who
Yeah.
people think is capable of change. And I think that mindset piece of if someone is bothering to say you can do better, they believe that I can do better. So it's on me to do better. And having that attitude when you're running a Zoom training is really, or any training to be honest, is really important. And also just a brief visual description can be really beneficial if you have sort of low vision or you're visually impaired.
I was just going to add a
think
tiny
go
thing
on.
to that. I was saying, if you've got a employee resource group, disability group, get them to tell you what works, then come
Yes.
up with some principles, stick it on a standard slide. So you've got your title slide. The next slide is, these are the principles that we adopt within our organization. We have video calls, and then try and get that rolled out to the whole organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think that's all we have time for in terms of chat today. So I just want to say a massive thank you again to our panelists, PK, Roxanne, and Simon, for such a thought-provoking and inspiring session. A few, hopefully you can see my screen, but there are a few key takeaways. So lived experience isn't just about storytelling, it's about strategy. These things really can make a difference to your business. Allyship isn't about perfection, you know, and as I think certainly come up in these last few statements around, you know, us not getting things right all the time. You know, it's about presence and action, and also inclusion must be embedded, you know, not just enacted. So there is a link to a feedback form on the screen, and I can share the link following if people do wish to give the feedback. I did mention earlier that this is a part of a series, our Inclusive Insights series. So do check out our Eventbrite page again for future links. We definitely have one for October, but we actually had an overwhelming response to the applications to be a panelist. So I am planning to do a lot more of these. And finally, just thank you to our audience for making the time to listen today. hopefully you've picked up some tips which you can go away and apply immediately back at work. I'm sure I can speak on behalf of my panelists in saying if you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to any of us to get in touch. None of our panelists today necessarily specifically work for Accessible Me, but that's fine. I'm not here to dominate the industry. What I am here to do is to raise voices and allow all of us an opportunity to speak, because I have my own lived experiences as a neurodivergent individual, but those aren't the same as another white male with the same conditions, or certainly some of those other areas of intersectionality or protected characteristics. So some of our panelists may have a hard stop at 1 o'clock, and I appreciate some of you as joining today may have a hard stop. I certainly am around for a couple of minutes, and some of our panelists may be as well. But if you do have any final questions, certainly I'm around, and I'll keep the session recording running in case you want to catch up on demand or YouTube or however we're doing this.
Thanks very much, Michael. Really appreciate the
Thank you,
time
Michael.
for this panel, and for everyone on their questions have been great.
Absolutely, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
I just seeing. I think we have 13 participants still on the call. Some of them may be note takers, some of them may still be humans. But if you do have any questions, if you want to pop them into the chat, or if you want to take the opportunity to come off mute, if you are going to come off mute, please could you raise your hands just to avoid us talking over you? That would be fantastic. So, Jeremy, if I can invite you to the virtual stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for your for this time today to just talk to us. Let me just get to it. I've been in the accessibility space for a while here. And I'm a small business, but having lots of expertise in the area, but not very many clients.
Yes.
And I was just wondering, just out of curiosity, like although there are many governments who kind of deal with accessibility, and that's only from time to time in a very limited capacity, what other industries are paying for accessibility? I think everyone talks the talk, but there are not many that walk the walk. And I was just wondering, do you guys know of any that are actually advocating for accessibility?
So,
Sorry.
yeah, I think it is really dependent. In my experience, at least in the way the UK works, the financial sector has quite a lot of push, at least from the customer facing side, to really be thinking about accessibility and inclusion, not even just restricted to disabilities, because of the kind of vulnerable customer service obligations and duties on them. So that can be really useful in terms of trying to find potential clients and potential inroads, because like there is a lot on them. And that's sort of like in terms of sectors, a lot of times things like sort of higher education universities might not be, will at least be talking about it. There's not necessarily always the budget, but that can be a good in. And generally, because we run a small business as well, and trying to sort of figure out those connections, often you will have people within your network that you're already connected to who may well know people who are interested in this. And like the thing is, there is a business case for most businesses across all sectors to be thinking about this. And it's just about unfortunately making those connections, which I'm sure but it's kind of luck.
Certainly, in my experience, there are a lot of councils and government bodies who need to do things, but there are certain restrictions in place. So, for a number of government-funded bodies, they need to work with businesses that have been in business for at least a year. I think that's due to just the nature of a lot of businesses fell in their first year, so they can't afford to invest money into those new startups, with fear of not being catered to. But ultimately, I think certainly with the European Accessibility Act and things like that, you are going to see more and more demand, because ultimately anyone who sells through their website to Europe and things like that, they now need to be compliant. So I do think certainly regional aspects are coming through. I'm launching a big project soon, neurodiversity in Asia, because the Asian countries are very behind the Western, and but I can see PK nodding along and Simon smirking as well. So again, you may have some thoughts to if I'd like to go over to Rox next.
What I would say is, you said what industries are paying. I think all
Yes.
industries are paying. Depends what they're paying for and why they're paying for it. It doesn't mean all companies are. I think the best advice that I could give you on more of a higher level, rather than this person, is don't go out there with what I offer. Go out there with, what do you need? Why are you asking for it? And think about partnerships.
And there's a couple of ways you could read that as well. Do you know, in terms of the industries paying for it, if they're not paying for it financially in terms of getting that support now, they will pay for it later in terms of reputation. Do you know, things like Glassdoor, whether that's the employee experience or just the consumer reputation. Do you know, so I think we often think of financial gain when we speak about companies paying, but you know they will pay in other ways if they don't start taking action at least soon.
I'll just add to that. I think you're absolutely right. And Jeremy, what I would suggest is that I think a lot of people think, global domination. Pick maybe one or two sectors and really drill down on the business case for that particular, and then identify, because I think as Rox said, they're all doing it or they all have to do it. I think that there are going to be some specific roles within an organization that you can then target. So let's suppose, and you said financial services, and then again, I'm not in the accessibility, but let's suppose there's an accessibility team or accessibility director, then you can focus on that. And then through LinkedIn, engage with them, provide some content. And I'm a big fan of developing a free resource. That might be a conversation, a review of their website, an assessment, that they fill in an assessment, something to get them seeing your value. And then on the basis of that, they'll start to see that actually, do you know what? Jeremy's saying a lot of sense. I think we need to do it. It's a good business case. It's not going to cost millions. I think that'd be a good idea to engage. So maybe that's a way to go through.
And also,
I'm afraid I've got
again,
to go. I've got to dash.
Simon. Thank you so much for joining.
Leave. It's lovely to meet you all, and
really appreciate
it. I'll speak to you soon. Take care.
Just to add one more thing to what's been said already, and that's if the compliance stick doesn't work, because it's just the right thing to do with the law, then speak about other business benefits. Now, if you asked any business, what would it mean to you and your business to rank higher on Google? Their ears will probably start picking up, oh yeah, we'd love to rank Google because that means more visitors to our website, more traffic, and then you go, okay. Please understand, Google crawlers, the bots that discover your website, they are deaf and they are blind. So if you don't have transcripts on your videos, they can't be heard. If you don't have alternative text on your images, all of these things will affect your SEO. And so by addressing accessibility on your website, you increase the SEO score. The better your SEO score, the more visitors on your website, and the broader the benefits. So if you start thinking in terms of, okay, think about who you're speaking to. If you're speaking to the owner of the business, that's going to be different to someone in purchasing, and try and think about, okay, what are their KPIs? What are they being targeted on? Because if they are being targeted, if they're HR, they might be targeted on reducing staff turnover or number of complaints. If they're in events, you might want to increase the amount of signups or the representation in the industry. You might want to reduce the amount of complaints for people who are wheelchair users, for example. There are a number of reasons, and so the why is going to be different person to person. And if you're not sure on what the why is, ask the question. Why do you want to do this? Why is it important? Where are you on your journey? So hopefully you've got your question thoroughly answered there.
Michael, I do have to go in a minute, but can I just
Yep.
check in to see if Lilith has a question before I
Absolutely, you can.
apologies? Maybe not.
Lily, are you with us?
Maybe not. Maybe.
Okay. It may be joined and recording.
Yeah.
PK, is there
That's
anything you'd like to add?
No, I think I also sort of like I have to go, but it was really, really lovely being here.
Absolutely
And
fine.
yeah,
Thank
you
you
so much
both
for having us all.
for the extra time. Rox, I know what you're heading to, so I just want to say good luck with that, and see you both again. Thank you for
All right.
making yourself available. It really is appreciated.
Thank
Brilliant.
you for
All right,
having
take
me.
care. Thanks for having us.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so much. It was
No
great.
problems. I'm thrilled to hear you enjoyed it. Take care, and I'll speak to you again.